Oh, thank you so much. I like the sprint. Um, okay, well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having me here. I mean, yeah, I really find it an honor to address you. Not so much about the topic that was announced. I know this is the graveyard shift. I mean, you just had a wonderful lunch, and there is a serious risk that people fall asleep. So I think this is the first surprise. It's not about what it seems. Secondly, before starting, I would like to thank Professor Abadan Unat for being here. I mean, I've been around quite a while in migration studies, but there's always a winner, Professor Abadan Unat, and and maybe it's a pleasure for me to say that one of the young persons with whom she carried out this project in Brazilian is a guy called Rinus Penninx. Rinus Penninx is, or actually was, with the University of Amsterdam. He retired now, but I'm his successor. So in that sense, we have a connection without us being aware of it, perhaps. All right. Well, this year, 2014, we are celebrating 50 years of migration from Turkey to the Netherlands. Actually, it's not true, because migration from Turkey to the Netherlands is much older than that. But 50 years ago, the agreements were signed between Turkey and the Netherlands to bring guest workers, to recruit guest workers, and bring them to the Netherlands to work as well as factory fitter. And I'm old enough to remember that. That is to say, I'm not old enough to remember the actual signage, because I was not part of that. But I grew up in the city of Rotterdam, in the Afrikaanderwijk, which is one of the poorest and most deprived neighborhoods. Typically a neighborhood where these guest workers would gravitate to. And I remember them arriving, initially, well, men, but increasingly also small families with their kids, first from Italy and Spain and later from other countries, including Turkey. And I also remember the first Spanish boy at our primary school. I think it was Carlos, but maybe it was Ramos, I'm not sure. I forgot that. But what I do remember is that we knew that he was stupid, because he didn't understand anything that was being said. He had to redo the same class twice, which is telling. Of course, we had no idea that when you come from Spain, you speak a different language, you feel totally lonely and disconnected. The teachers had no idea how to deal with such immigrant kids. So he was hopelessly lost, although he did show up every day at school. And this is just an example to show well, how easy it is to fall into the traps of prejudice. Well, the same neighborhood, the Afrikaanderwijk, was the site of what became to be known as the first serious race riots, or what we call in Dutch a Turkenrellen, which is difficult to translate, but it were riots organized by local Dutch residents who were fed up with all these newcomers coming to the neighborhood. And it was for 4 or 5 days. It was riot all over the place. I mean, nothing compared to the Gezi Park riots. But in the Dutch context, this was seen as very, very serious. And actually one of the first cases that demonstrated a form of prejudice. And I have, oh, here it is. And if it works, and it will work, there's a few pictures that demonstrates it. As a matter of fact, I lived very close to this apartment building, and these were used as hostels for guest workers, and some strong workers, Rotterdam workers, they went upstairs and they threw all the goods in the house on the street, and the rest of the crowd, of the mob, was applauding this. Well, the police obviously didn't appreciate that. And these riots took place again for 4 or 5 days. Well, here you see some of the people who were the victim of these riots, and obviously they didn't appreciate what happened. The Dutch, no, not the Dutch, the Rotterdam local government, the city council, responded immediately. And they responded as follows. They said, well, we understand that the say, inter-ethnic relations. The word was not used, by the way, but the relations between guest workers and native Dutch people is problematic. So that's why we want to interfere. And our measure will be that the share of immigrants in a particular neighborhood may not exceed 5%. So they basically said, well, we understand the complaints of our native Dutch residents, and we will reward their actions by saying that we will cap the number of immigrants. At the same time, new plans were rolled out to crack down on overcrowded guest worker hostels and so on and so forth. Well, it took 4 years before what we call the Crown, but that's the highest legal office in the Netherlands, decided that this was a very inappropriate measure. It took 4 years to determine that it was actually a racist measure. It was an unconstitutional measure. The idea, so and immediately this dispersal policy was abolished. That is abolished from the official documents, because the City Council of Rotterdam, they just continued. They thought, okay, we cannot cap the number of immigrants in a particular neighborhood, but what we are able to do is to encourage people to disperse. So the riots took place in 1972. In 1979, a policy was introduced for voluntary dispersal. And there were new scientific insights, and they told the local council that that it's not 5%, but 17% of immigrants would be a nice balance. Don't ask me on what ground that 17% is based. It was totally arbitrary, the same as the 5%, by the way. There was a lot of discussion in the newspapers, and when I was at high school, I clipped this from a newspaper, and I had no idea that I would become a professor in studying migration studies. But apparently, I did something that was smart for once in my life. And so there is this cartoon, and it basically said it's about. Somebody from the city council who is punished by mothers-in-law because he proposed to cap the numbers of mothers-in-law in a particular neighborhood for 5%. Anyway, I thought you should also get that. Well, this plan to have a voluntary dispersal up to 70%, so that the share of immigrants in the neighborhood in Rotterdam would not exceed 17%. Obviously failed. And if you would go to the city of Rotterdam now, the total city, the share of immigrants, first and second generation immigrants, is over 50%. In particular neighborhoods is even over 80 or 85%. So this also showed the limits of governmental interference. Dispersal policies, nobody talks about it anymore. I mean, that's seen as not done. We don't do that. That's racist. That only would be an element of rewarding prejudices. At the same time, a concept that is very popular is that one of a social mix. So a social mix sounds very nice. It doesn't say, well, we don't want to have too many immigrants around, but a social mix is good. And if you ask civil servants or politicians, what exactly do you mean with a social mix? They would say, well, you need to have working class people and middle class people, and so they can support each other, and that the working class people see the example of the middle class people, and the middle class people mind the fate of working class people. That's the idea. In Rotterdam, however, class has a color, so to speak. When you talk about working class in Rotterdam, or in Amsterdam for that matter, or any other big city, you're talking about immigrants. So under the pretext of, well, we want to have a nice class balance in our neighborhood, under that pretext, it's basically about ethnic diversity. It's managing, engineering ethnic diversity. Anyway, the point that I want to make is that this focus on the social mix is not standing in isolation, and is not just related to prejudice. It's not just related to managing inter-ethnic relations. There are also material components connected to that. And I will demonstrate that by a particular case. It so happens that I'm interested in shops and shopping and retail landscapes. I've been working on ethnic entrepreneurship for quite a long time, and basically it's like chocolate pudding. I love chocolate pudding, but a cubic meter is rather a lot, so it's time to taste vanilla. So after having studied ethnic entrepreneurship, and I'm now more and more interested in changing retail landscapes, that includes ethnic entrepreneurs, but also mainstream entrepreneurs. And increasingly, I'm interested in consumption and so on and so forth. And one of the projects takes place in Amsterdam, in the eastern part of Amsterdam. And it's a neighborhood, it's a working class neighborhood that's very quickly undergoing very quick gentrification. The context of that has multiple layers. And I'm inclined to say, and this is a gross reduction of reality, obviously, that there's a couple of urban problems, urban challenges that play a key role. Well, one of them, obviously, is the integration of immigrants. The integration of immigrants is seen as being high on the political agenda, if only because the voters or journalists demand it. It's seen as something that's very difficult. It's always discussed with an element of impatience. We have been trying to integrate these immigrants in the past 30 years and they're still not integrated. That's sort of the thought. In those discussions, there is an enormous element of homogenization. The idea that there's only one type of immigrants, namely those that are not part of the mainstream, or what's worse, those who are not willing to be part of the mainstream. Totally, say, ignorant of the complexity of the different, say, integration or participation trajectories. And that is seen as problematic. It's seen as affecting social cohesion. So there are all these attempts to engineer the integration of immigrants. The second challenge is improving the housing sector. Well, in Amsterdam is one of the cities with a relatively high share of social housing. And unlike the US, where social housing is only available for the poorest of the poorest, in the Netherlands, people with a low income, but still a reasonable income, also have access to social housing. And once you're there, it's impossible to kick you out of the house, unless you make a terrible mess. So it's thinkable that somebody who is a student starts renting an apartment in the social housing sector. And students have a low income, so that sounds fair. Then the person graduates, becomes a professional, get a good job, maybe even become a full professor, and bring all those millions, and still live in social housing. And that's seen as problematic, because this is not the reason why the government sponsored these houses. But there are other aspects, part of it. There's also the idea that social housing attracts poor people. And poor people or attracts people without proper jobs. And the city is not interested in having people without good education or a good job. The city wants to attract professionals. And there are no houses available. So the leading to a mismatch of, say, what's available in the economy and people who are participating in the economy don't have access to the housing system. And the sector is improved in a very simple way. So a part of the social housing sector is sort of withdrawn from that sector. That's just done by a signature. Then these apartments are being refurbished and sold on the private market. And so that means that an inexpensive apartment is suddenly worth, say, 250,000 euro. And who are the ones who would buy these apartments? Professionals, young professionals. And here you see the combination. It's taking away social housing, and we're talking about substantial changes. For instance, in the neighborhood that I've studied, the share of social housing used to be 90%, 90, and now it's almost 60%. So we're talking about big numbers. And replacing working class families by young professionals and their families. And that also means, as I just indicated, because class has a color, that also the ethnic composition of the neighborhood is changing. It's actually diluting the presence of immigrants. Social mix. The third challenge, and they're all related, is boosting the creative economy. So, say 40, 50 years ago, the economy was based on manufacturing, as is the case in many other big cities. There's shipbuilding, ship repair, there was a car factory, garment production was very important in Amsterdam, there was tobacco, and so on and so forth. Well, these industries vanished. At least they were relocated to low-wage countries. I mean, garments are still important, but only the design part and sales, but not so much the production itself. But it also means that the blue-collar workers who found jobs in these sectors have no jobs anymore. And instead you have this new sort of cultural industries in finance, in media, in other sort of, say, cultural sectors. And these sectors, they need high-skilled professionals. They're not interested so much in low-skilled people, although you can imagine that somebody needs to clean it. Or if you have internet, somebody needs to construct a Wi-Fi system. But thank you. But and the good thing is that by making houses available, Amsterdam and Rotterdam and so on is able to attract people to boost this economy, and at the same time they interfere in the integration of immigrants simply by making immigrants invisible. Well, let me show you a few pictures. I lost track of my time.
You have spoken for 20 minutes.
20 minutes, so I got 10. All right. Well, thanks. In the eastern part of Amsterdam, there is this neighborhood called the Indische Buurt, the Indonesian neighborhood, because all the streets are named after one of the Indonesian islands. And in the middle of the neighborhood, and this picture was taken before the Second World War, there is this structure. It used to be a bathhouse because there were no showers or bathrooms in these tenements, but that's why a bathhouse serves a good purpose. And this picture was taken on the day to celebrate the anniversary of the neighborhood, and lots of people they loved it. And most people found employment in the in the harbor related or port related industries very nearby. And well, here's one of the shops. This is just what we would call a deli shop, very classical, non-existent anymore. I tried to make a picture of the shop that's today here. I know there was a dentist, and now it's sort of closed. It's unclear what the next function is. If you would walk through the shopping streets in that neighborhood, you would be able to see the changes that have taken place since the demise of the manufacturing industries. Because in the 1960s and 70s, guest workers and their families and other immigrants gravitated to that neighborhood because they were the ones who found employment in this sector. And with that, say, typical local Dutch shops disappeared and immigrant shops emerged. And, well, phone shops, very popular. The government hates it. They think, where phone shop, they're trouble. They think this is just an excuse for money laundering, and it's a hotbed for criminal activities. I'm not so sure that's true, but the arrival of these type of shops is seen as a sign that the neighborhood is going down the drain, and we need to interfere in it as soon as possible. Here, even more than that. Well, obviously, also Turkish places. people think this is messy, but I don't subscribe to that. It's very neatly organized. I mean, it's packed, but it's really nicely organized. Well, here's the same shop. Say around 2000, there were lots of problems. Streets were not very safe. There were lots of drug-related criminal activities. And then it was decided to interfere in this neighborhood. And as said, one of the things that was being done is reducing the social housing sector. Well, here is, this is what you get then. I mean, it's sort of, people are encouraged to move out. And these apartments are boarded up, and later they are either tear down or rebuilt. So this is sort of the way the neighborhood now looks like today. This is very old, but it's all redone with new windows and new bathrooms, and this is all private at the moment, no social housing anymore. And in fact, these type of houses are very popular because it's old, it has style, and at the same time it's very near the inner city, and only €250,000. With the changes in the housing sector, the local government also interfered in, say, the retail landscapes. First of all, by promoting this. This is a sort of an art house, movie house kind of institute. There's a wonderful restaurant where you find people like you. You know, these young professionals, students. They get a beer, they have a bite, and then they go to a movie. Here, this it also tells a bit. This is one of the biggest squares, and in fact, this apartment block got a prize for the say architectural prize. But what I want to show is this. So it means that it's not just the houses that are being refurbished, it's also the streetscape. I mean, this is very artistic. They hired artists to do this, because in a neighborhood that is improving, you need to have a high quality sort of environment. And here you see some of the new people in the neighborhood, young professionals, nicely white, with their carrier bicycles. I mean, you know what it is? Bakfietsen? You know bikes, right? Amsterdam has a serious problem with parking. I mean, parking is impossible in Amsterdam, or very expensive. So a lot of people, notably sort of young families, they buy these things, and you can put your groceries here, and then move around. Parking is not the issue because you can park everywhere. Or your children, and you want to bring your children to the kindergarten or school, and it's incredibly popular. And I'm inclined to say, where carrier bikes, their gentrification. Well, this is the same bathhouse that I just showed in this picture, and now it's converted into a grand cafe, and this is really the turf of the new urbanites. It's you know, you can order your cappuccino, a latte macchiato, the triple grandi, dry, and so on and so forth, or minty. Around this what is it, area, there's plenty of place to park your bicycle, carrier bicycle. There are new restaurants coming in, the Wild Boars. Can you imagine how many Muslims would go to that place? I think 0. And here, this is one of the newer shops. So this is not a Habradashi. This is a very cool, almost artistically decorated jean shop. And the funny thing is, it's called DIV, D-I-V, which according to the owner is an abbreviation of diversity. And he really believes that he is the one who brings diversity into that neighborhood. Well, why am I telling you this? Because you could argue that in this process that the number of immigrants is being reduced gradually. You could argue that this is actually a dispersal policy in disguise, and you can make that point. but it's very difficult to put your finger on it. Because the government, the housing associations, researchers would say, no, no, no, this is about gentrification. And gentrification is good. Social scientists tend to be critical about gentrification, but in this world, it's seen as good. And the ones who think that it's good have a lot of proof, because they argue, listen, the number of unemployed have decreased. The number, say the share of welfare dependency has gone down. The level of education has gone up. The land values have come up. So all these parameters demonstrate that this neighborhood is really improving. The streetscape has more quality, and you have this wonderful, I mean, this is, say, the Dutch equivalent of Starbucks. It's not here spontaneously. The local aldermen, they went to the coffee company's headquarters and they were begging on their knees, please come here, come to our neighborhood, because we need you. We need this shop as a sign that the neighborhood is improving. I'm inclined to say that it's very important to, well, let me rephrase it. Could you argue that this is sort of a prejudice in disguise? I don't think so, because material conditions play a very serious role. And true, I mean, the quality of the neighborhood, of the houses, of the retail landscape, and so on and so forth, has really improved. But there is still a problem, because it basically it leads to the exclusion of lower class immigrants. And nobody talks about that. At the same time, by praising a neighborhood that, like the one that we have now, there is an implicit message that could strengthen all sorts of prejudices, in the sense that the message that radiated here is that a good neighborhood is a neighborhood that has a reasonable number of immigrants, and those immigrants who stay are sort of good folks, are people who understand modern way of life. Of course, we interviewed people, and we just asked them, well, what do you think of it? And the funny thing is that these new professionals who gravitated to that neighborhood, that they think this is a cool neighborhood, it's very diverse, it's multicultural, at the same time a bit edgy, and apparently they don't reflect on their own position, because their arrival reduces, say, the diversity in the neighborhood, whatever that one's shop owner would claim. We also interviewed, say, immigrants, and funnily enough, they argue it's good for the neighborhood, because the neighborhood has a better reputation now. No, we will never go to the bookstore, to the big restaurants, or the design shop, and so on. We will never go there, but that's okay. But we also found that the coffee company is gravitated by Moroccan girls. And we were very puzzled, because we thought this is not what we expected. And we also asked them, what are you doing here? And they said, well, it's a wonderful place. We have lots of space. There's no alcohol being served here. We are not harassed by men, or men ask questions. He would go to a Moroccan coffee house. So apparently this is not, say, a place that is purely frequented by middle-class folks only. So maybe I'm too pessimistic about that. Anyway, that's my own marketing. So anyway, what we found is that the city council tries to interfere in lots of different things, including creating a cohesive society, but also improving the housing sector and boosting the economy. And this is happening simultaneously and in a connected way. And you could describe that as a form of gentrification, but not just gentrification, it's state-led. It's the government that is orchestrating everything. And during that process, diversity is hardly mentioned, and if it's mentioned, of course, people say, well, it's wonderful that we have this diverse neighborhood, and that's it. The reduction of the number of immigrants again, intended by the City Council of Rotterdam in 1972, and now it's sort of, you don't talk about it. It's under the, what was the ice, under the terrorist line, what was it? Yeah. Well, you could argue that, I mean, the lingo that's used, the social mix, is a mantra that covers everything up. But at the same time, I'm not sure that you can say that those who promote the social mix are just people who are prejudiced. So in that sense, it's much more complicated. And that's what I wanted to say. And then I have my own marketing because I'm a small entrepreneur myself. Thank you.
Right. I also want to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me here, and it's a pleasure to be with you all here. What I will do here is a combination of what I did in the last few years, trying to set up a bridge between migration-related phenomena and the other phenomena, because I try to look at the world. I try to look at the states governing the social and political realities through the prism of a kind of neoliberal governance or neoliberal governmentality, using Foucauldian terminology. So what I will do here is to really bring two different works of mine together under the framework of what I call the rise of neoliberal governmentality, neoliberal governance for the last 3 decades or so. In 2012, I published Islam, Migration and Integration, The Age of Securitization. Nermin Hoca referred to that book. And then later I published another book on Turkey, actually, Europeanization and Tolerance, The Myth of Toleration. This is about the Kurdish question, Alevi question, and the headscarf question, and the ways in which the AKP government specifically tried to resolve these issues, these problems. The common denominator between the two is that my premise is that all these social and political phenomena take place in a time when the neoliberal governance is really rising all around the world, which means what is social and what is political is being reduced to what is cultural, what is religious, what is communal, at the expense of what is social and what is political being kind of erased from the minds of individuals in a way. So what I will do here to talk about multiculturalism, the failure of multiculturalism, and the failure of the rhetoric of tolerance. The rhetoric of tolerance, Jan, is not only relevant to the Dutch case, of course. The rhetoric of tolerance is relevant to many other cases, including the Turkish case. So if we look at the ways in which the, let's say, modern states or states try to resolve ethnic, religious, cultural diversity, in general, we see that there are two ways to manage diversity, as we all know probably. One is what we call unity in diversity, multiculturalist model, and there are some names here I put, and the other one is unity over diversity, republicanist model, as we have experienced in some cases such as France and Turkey. But the thing is that one of the things that we all know by heart is rhetorics are always different from realities, or vice versa. Reality is always different from the rhetoric. For instance, when you look at the republicanist model, I think republicanist model is a great model. You know, which is not really talking about cultural, religious, ethnic diversity, because it is blind to those kinds of differences, but it is basically trying to embrace equality, dignity, human dignity, common denominators of all individuals, etc., citizenship, etc. But the thing is that when you look at the Turkish case or the French case, the republicanist model is not really working out very well. Real republicanism is very much different from the republican rhetoric. We know that there is a great discrimination, there is great inequality and injustice in France with respect to migrant populations, migrant origin populations, especially the Muslim origin populations. And also in Turkey, despite the fact that there's nothing in the constitution, discriminating against the minorities, we know that minorities, all kinds of sociological, anthropological, or legal minorities, being discriminated in this country. So, real republicanism, what I call real republicanism, is not really working out very well. But so is not multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is being attacked by several circles, not only by right-wing circles like Angela Merkel or Sarkozy or David Cameron, but also from the left-wing circles, but for various reasons, of course. When I look at the current state of multiculturalism, especially in the aftermath of the Soviet Union, we see that multiculturalism was severely criticized from the right-wing circles in 1990s, immediately during and after the Balkans crisis, the Yugoslav crisis. This actually coincides with the famous rhetoric of Huntington about the clash of civilizations. So basically, that was the testimony, in brackets of course, of the fact that the Muslims and Christians and the others cannot really live together, right? So we have seen a lot of critiques directed towards multiculturalism in 1990s, in 2000s, and now the same critiques have been actually directed to multiculturalism again in 2010. For instance, this was a cover page of the Der Spiegel magazine, news magazine, back in 1997 when I was doing my own field work for the for my PhD work in Berlin. That was the time when really multiculturalism was at stake, being criticized, and this category of Muslim is being used very popularly. As Nermin Hoca said, all of a sudden all these people were put into the same basket. Muslims being violent, Muslims being very conservative, very essentialist, and Muslims very nationalist. But it is quite interesting actually that the same, for instance, this woman in front with the Turkish flag, it was the same image used in early 1990s in Germany again to celebrate German multiculturalism. Look at these people; they can celebrate. It's like the United States, celebrating your celebrating your locality, celebrating your autochthonous, identity, but also implicitly celebrating Americanness, which is letting you celebrate your, peculiarities. So then we have seen especially the same critiques revisited, especially after 9/11, all the way down here. And recently we have discussed a lot referring to Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy, and David Cameron's discourse blaming multiculturalism. I'm one of the actually critiques of multiculturalism from a very left-wing perspective, actually, because I don't believe that multiculturalism is really something that resolves the problems of minority. On the contrary, as Jan Roth said several years ago, multiculturalism is nothing but reminorization of minorities, re-ethnicization of ethnicities, and re-religionization of religious groups of people. So it is, on the contrary, deepens the problems of minority populations. It is, on the contrary, a rather neo-colonial form of governmentality. It's, on the contrary, rather a neo-nationalist form of governmentality. I go even that extreme to talk about multiculturalism. But after seeing the critiques of Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy, David Cameron from the right-wing perspective, like David Schlesinger in 1990s in the United States, and Hugh Roberts, I think, using the same rhetoric about the Hispanics, not learning English and blaming multiculturalism and claiming that U.S. is being disunified. So then I happen to start, in a way, promote multiculturalism, because multiculturalism in the end cannot be that bad. But anyway, that's another discussion. Well, we have also seen lately, especially after 9/11, in the European context as well as in the Western context in general, that Islam has become really demonized. Islam has really become, stigmatized for several reasons. And it is, in a way, for instance, for the US context, Islam is a kind of enemy outside. But in the European context, Islam is a kind of enemy within, as well as enemy outside. So we have seen all these debates about Islam, Muslims, and Islamophobia, etc., etc. But the thing is that in my own works, I try to underline that Islamophobia is rather a kind of misnomer, because phobia is a natural phenomena. So being afraid of Muslims is also portrayed with the term of Islamophobia as a natural phenomena. I rather instead use either this term, Islamophobia, together with like Islamophobia as a form of governmentality, using the Foucauldian terminology, or I coined Islamophobism, or anti-Muslimism, like anti-Semitism, right? Because now this is the common sport, this is the popular sport everywhere for various reasons that especially several different political parties and some states are even using the ideology of Islamophobism in a way to stigmatize a group of people as scapegoats to really run their show in a way. So when you look at some of the speeches, this is the famous George Bush. He said terrible things. I mean, he said very holistic, very terrible things, deepening the divides, civilizational divides, and even deepening, even at the expense of reducing civilization to what is religious. I mean, to my knowledge, in the 19th and 20th century sociological tradition, there was a kind of conflict between civilization, not a conflict, but a difference between civilization and culture. If you look at the German philosophical tradition or the French philosophical tradition, you will see these divide very much, civilisation and culture. But today, I mean, in the past, civilization was mainly meant to be some kind of material process. Civilization means urbanization. Civilization means progress. Civilization means industrialization. Civilization means all these, machinery and everything. But today, in our everyday language, civilization has become reduced to religion and culture. So we tend to equate civilization with culture today. So the divide between civilizational discourse and the culturalist discourse in the past is no longer there. And I think there is a neoliberal, again, governance here, reducing what is social, what is political, what is economic, to what is basically cultural, to what is religious, to what is communal. So there is still, a kind of neoliberal form of governmentality here. I'm not going to go into details of these speeches. Berlusconi was one of them. what this is really interesting. Oriana Fallaci, a very actually famous, novelist from Italy. But the things that she said after 9/11 was really striking. I mean, very racist, very holistic, very reductionist. Putting everything, everyone, every Muslim origin person at kind of a difficult position. So they're here. They feel authorized to kill you and your children because you drink wine or beer, because you don't wear a long beard or a chador, because you go to the theater and cinemas, because you listen to music and songs. Yes, maybe we can say these things for ISIS at the moment in Iraq, but when you say that Muslims are doing that, it is a really risky business, to put everything into the same basket, right? And then, of course, when you look at the opinion polls, surveys, this is a very recent, actually, survey, how actually in many European countries, Islam is being, securitized, Islam is being stigmatized, Islam. But the thing is that, again, this is proven, scientifically proven, Islamophobia is popular in those places where there are not Muslims in the city or in the places that we talk about. So basically, we fear the ones that we don't know anything about at all, right? So, again, this is probably one of the messages of this summer school, to know the other people, to interact with them, is a great, actually, antidote to fight against prejudice, to fight against stereotypes. So what is happening, I believe, is that what is social and what is political and what is economic is being simply reduced to what is cultural. If you look at ourselves, we also, most of us maybe, tend to tend to explain everything through culture, through ethnicity, through religion, right? We try to explain the reasons of, let's say, honor crimes through Islam, through religion. And we don't really look at the social economic conditions on which these crimes being committed. We have lost that perspective. So this is one of my actually interventions in my own study to try to call back social and political parameters in order to understand what is really happening outside. Sorry. Right. Let me just go through. So basically, Islamophobia has been operating as an ideology for almost a decade, more than a decade. But I argue that this is really no longer sustainable. And I think the Breivik incidents in Norway was one of the indicators that this is no longer sustainable. Because Breivik incidents show that Islamophobia, in a way, strikes back. And it is an extreme case, actually, Breivik case is an extreme case, whereby a young guy killing his own citizens with the premise that Norway is being at siege by the Muslims, by multiculturalists, or by whoever they are. So then it is no longer actually possible to really sustain this form of ideology called Islamophobism or anti-Muslimism. Well, another thing that I should also draw your attention to is the fact that Islam is no longer simply a religion anymore. Islam is more than that. Islam is an ideology for the ones coming from Islamic religion, because it is quite interesting to realize that, at least that's what I do, that there is this incredible parallel between the demise of communism, demise of socialism, and the rise of Islam. According to Michel de Certeau, one of my favorite scholars, talking about strategies and tactics, de Certeau says, well, Islam provides the people with an alternative world where something different is possible, like communism promised, like socialism promised, right? So Islam, in a way, for some people, sounds like the heart of a heartless world, like Marx said several decades ago, right? So then we should also take into account that those who really identify themselves with Islam have something to really talk about, as we have listened, because sometimes we hear people saying things, but actually they don't really mean that. They try to say something else, but we don't really want to hear about that. For instance, in Germany, integration, as in several other countries actually, integration of migrants is being reduced to linguistic and cultural assimilation or integration, right? When a Turkish origin person does not speak German, immediately the authorities blame this person of not really being incorporatist, not really being integrationist. But then we should really, as social scientists, we should really try to understand why there is an obstacle before this person to learn the language. It is, of course, a rational choice to learn the language, and everyone is, anthropologically speaking, is rational. It knows what is right or wrong for himself or herself, right? But I argue that not learning the language might also be a kind of political resistance to the state that you don't really trust. In Tarlabaşı, just across the street here, there is quite a big Kurdish origin community, IDPs, internally displaced people, in the last 30 years, congregating here, trying to live together with the Roma communities, right? There's a lot of clash. And also African immigrants coming, transit immigrants, Syrians are coming. You know, it's really a great, actually, laboratory. You should just go across the street. 50%, 55, oh, this is a number, this is a figure of like 5 years ago. We did the research there. 50% of the Kurdish origin women there do not speak Turkish and are not willing to learn Turkish. Are they stupid? I don't think so. But this is a way of showing their resistance to the state, to the Turkish state, which is in a way likely to impose, let's say, the Turkish language or the other things on those people. So if you're not really allowed to express your concerns through legitimate grounds, parliament, or mainstream media, or labor unions, or whatever, then you are forced to express yourself through the languages that you know by heart. And the languages that you know by heart might be ethnicity, the language of ethnicity, the language of religion, the language of violence sometimes. So violence is also a kind of politics, but not appreciated, of course. So here, what is really underlining, what I really try to underline is the role of the state to accommodate these conflicts. The contemporary states are not really properly accommodating all these people. They're not properly accommodating. On the contrary, what they're doing is the easiest way to really put the blame on the migrants, put the blame on the excluded, put the blame on the subordinated, because they know that they don't really matter that much in terms of electoral, maneuvering. They have the majorities, right? So this is, the way I try to look at the things. And finally, of course, there are here all these left-wing critiques about multiculturalism, because multiculturalism is simply a kind of racism, according to Zizek, for instance, or it's a kind of folklorization of culture, having different ethnic food, ethnic cuisine, ethnic music, etc. It's actually contributing to the consumerist ideology in a way, providing us with some other material to really consume in terms of cuisine or food or dress, etc. So finally, let me conclude with the rhetoric of tolerance, which is the topic of the other book. Well, multiculturalism always goes along together with the rhetoric of tolerance, right? But we also use the word tolerance or toleration in everyday life. I mean, it's a biological term, actually. Our stomach tolerates some certain medications and not really some other medications. So this is a term that we, in a way, pick up from biology, for instance. But the thing is that tolerance, this is, in the Dutch case, it is no longer being used, right, Jan? The rhetoric of tolerance.
But it does exist.
It does exist, exactly. In everyday language, it still does exist. In the Turkish language, especially tolerance, hoşgörü, tahammül has become very evidential, very popular in the last decade during the AKP reign. Giving a very neo-Ottoman, multiculturalist outlook to the outside. While we're tolerant, Turks are tolerant. There are prejudices, Turks are hospitable, right? If you hear something a lot, that means that thing doesn't really exist. If you hear a lot of rhetoric about tolerance in the Netherlands, that means tolerance doesn't exist. If you hear a lot about tolerance, hoşgörü, tahammül in the Turkish society, in the Ottoman society, you should be sure that it doesn't really exist. Discursive acts are very different from the acts themselves, right? Prejudice is a kind of feeling. It turns out to be discrimination when it becomes an act. So here, tolerance, etymologically speaking, it is a very problematic term, actually. Tolerance, coming from Latin word tolerer, which is an equivalent term of to suffer, right? In all different European languages. So we actually tolerate what we are suffering from. Ideally, it would be great if it didn't really exist. It would be great if the Protestants didn't exist for the Catholics in France in the 16th century. But then the world changes. Well, it was easy before. You just exterminate them, right? But now, of course, the modern state apparatus, and then connected world and colonialism, and then industrialization, labor, etc., etc. You need people. You need populations. So the new system, the new modern state system, doesn't let you exterminate anyone anymore. So you need to live together. So rhetoric of tolerance was actually coined in the 16th century, actually in the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century, in Romania. In the Balkans, it was used, tahammül, right? Which is also, again, tahammül in Arabic comes from hamil, hamal, yük, hamal, hani yük taşıyan var ya. So it is actually the same kind of terminology which is being coined back in the 15th and 16th century to resolve the conflicts resulting from religious matters. But the thing is that today, some people are trying to make us believe that the problems that we're having at the moment are also religious-based problems. If we sort out the religious, diversity in in like dialogue, interreligious dialogue, or intercommunal dialogue, or you see, all these things are underlining culture, identity, religion, as if they are the sources of tensions. No, religion has never been the source of tension anywhere. It is just a, disguise. The tension is there materially. The tension is there politically. The tension is there, socially, right? So this is why tolerance rhetoric is actually a very well thought rhetoric to again reduce what is social, what is political, what is economic to what is cultural. And I named this neoliberal governance. Thank you very much for your attention.
In my talk, I'm afraid, I will take you a little
away from theoretical and empirical and very interesting discussion, I will give information on Migration Research Center at Koç University in order to draw a picture on how transnational migration dynamics and processes are perceived operationally. Or I could say how and with what motives we study migration here. But before starting to my talk, let me ask a question. May I see hands of those who have moved from one place to another permanently or for a temporary period of time? Wow, great. What about your parents? Can I see hands? What about your grandparents? Okay, great. That's what I was trying to talk. Actually, here I'm trying to make visible that migration is a phenomenon or social reality that embraces all of us. Within this context, Turkey plays three key roles in the international migration system as source country, destination, and transit route for migrants. More than 5 million Turkish students live abroad, mainly in Europe, and since the early 2000s, around 250,000 immigrants of varying statuses have arrived in Turkey each year. These flows make Turkey an important part of transnational migration networks. Thousands of Turkish citizens live in Europe, as I already said, the Middle East, and North Africa, countries in the Commonwealth of Independent States, Australia, and the Americas. Meanwhile, most immigrants come to Turkey from the Middle East, post-Soviet regions, Europe, and Asia. In addition to these flows of immigration and immigration, Turkey has also experienced internal mass migration since 1950s, typically from rural to urban areas. This mass mobility, in turn, has triggered social, economic, political, and demographic transformations in many Turkish cities. Turkey is as a hub of immigration, emigration, and transmigration, making an excellent setting for researching different dimensions of migration. While migration research in Turkey has attracted significant attention, the opportunities for improvement and progress in this area of research are still plentiful. These studies will not only contribute empirically and theoretically to migration-related literature on Turkey, but also to a larger body of international scholarship, as, for example, Dr. Kaya already put it in a very, in his, I think, theoretically marvelous speech. Within this framework, the Migration Research Center at Koç University, Mire Koç, ideally positioned to support research on international and internal migration, primarily in the Turkish context, with a focus on 7 major topics. The topics include the origins of migratory flows, determinants of migration flows, continuity over time, use of migrant labor, government and international organizations' attempts to manage migration, sending countries, receiving countries, and migrants as agencies of the migration, and dynamics of and mechanisms of migration, including those agencies acting in transnational spaces and networks. Mire Koç provides opportunities for researchers and students from diverse disciplinary backgrounds, as well as promoting interdisciplinary research. Diverse research methods are employed in both quantitative and qualitative analysis and studies focusing on new empirical questions, or those that adopt new data are particularly welcome. So with this mission, Mire Koç aims to generate new research on migration, Expand spectrums for research and encourage collaboration between researchers, integrate research on migration in Turkey with global studies, also study the close environment of Turkey, including European, Asian, and African countries, and promote dialogue between researchers, policymakers, and civil society activists, not in the sense of religious dialogue, obviously. The Migration Research Center was established in 2004 to provide grants for research on migration issues in Turkey. From 2004 to 2010, Mirakoç, in conjunction with Koç University and the Foundation for Population, Migration and Environment, PME, BMU, based in Zurich, provided grants for a total of 43 research projects on various migration issues. Since 2010, this funding has continued through the Mirakoç graduate student research grant competition, which supports 1 or 2 studies each year. Soon after its establishment, Mirakoç also began to conduct its own research with funding provided by various national and international organizations such as Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey, TÜBİTAK, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, GMF, and the European Union. While Mirakoç's research initially focus exclusively on the Turkish context, this scope has steadily widened to other countries and regions over the years, with a theoretical and empirical contribution to the migration studies. In 2010, Mirakoç was accredited by the Turkish Council of Higher Education as a research center for migration issues, thus solidifying Mirakoç's position as one of the region's leading migration research institutions. As we celebrate our 10th anniversary this year, Mirakoç is established as an active research center both in Turkey and in the international arena. In addition to conducting and funding research, the center also issues publications and organizes events including international conferences, seminars, and annual summer school. Between 2004 and 2010, the center funded 43 research projects in collaboration with PME, as I already mentioned. These projects cover a wide range of topics within the field of migration studies, from marriage migration to post-conflict displacement, and from trafficking victims to retirees. Since 2011, Mirakoç has provided funding for select graduate student projects. Past projects include, I'm not gonna read those, but just to name a few, include Turkish Brain Drain to the USA by Şebnem Akçapar, African Migrants in Istanbul by Deniz Yükseker and Kelly Brewer, the Migrated Archives during the population exchange, or Umbrella Organization of Turkish Migrants, which is a comparative study of organizations in Germany and Austria. And the urban transformation in Izmir, a study on internal migration and forced migration, or Turkish police cadets' perception towards foreigner, the migration system between Russia and Turkey, past trends and new prospect, just to name a few. As a center, those were the examples of funded projects, and as a center, we also completed several projects again, I'm not gonna go read the whole the content of those, but the names at least. Irregular migration at two borders, the Turkish EU and Mexican USA cases, funded by the German Marshall Fund of the United States, IRTEMU. My cities project was funded by British Council, and the project focused on 9 cities from both UK and other European countries. A TÜBİTAK funded project, IMASPO, International Migration and Asylum Policies in Turkey, from 1923 to 2000, from nation-state formation to transnational transformation. And also 7th Framework Program funded MIUMTAI project, managing international urban migration in Turkey, Italy and Spain. Transnet project you see there, it's one of its dissemination from the project. The book was edited by Pekko Pitkänen, Ahmet İşduygu, and Deniz Sert. And what else? Imagine project, imagining Europe from outside. That was another project which is very closely related with today's subject. And Russia and Turkey migration systems is another project we can call. Another FP7 project funded by EU was Integrum project, still continuing project actually. It's a PhD program funded by lifelong learning program in Europe. And the migrants' perception of Turkish citizenship is another project continuing. 2 other projects are still on right now. One is Euronet, that's transnational migration in transition. That's a project on temporary migration, and also Les Femmes Sol. It's a learning for female African migrants' solidarity. Yeah, I already mentioned Mira Koç since 2011 has organized an annual 2-week-long summer school on international migration, which takes place at Koç University's main campus in Sarıyer. Our 4th one this year is going to start on Monday, next Monday, and it's going to continue for 2 weeks. The program is intended for graduate students as well as for junior researchers at migration-related NGOs and international organizations. The summer school includes lectures on migration from distinguished international faculty, as well as workshops on related policy issues, field trips within Istanbul, and seminars by policy makers. In order to share our research findings with the academic community, policymakers, and wider public, we produce books and other publications such as reports, including some of the books you can see there. I won't read those books, the names of those books. Another activity I have already mentioned, we organize frequent conferences in order to promote the exchange of ideas and information within the migration studies community, as well as an annual dissemination conference at which the results of that year's Mira Koç funded projects are shared and discussed. Here are some of those. And this year, to celebrate our 10th year anniversary, we are organizing a conference or symposium Professor Dr. Kaya and Dr. Rath are the members of scientific committee of that conference. It's gonna be on November, and these are just to name some conferences, seminars, workshops. I see here Dr. Roth in 2006 providing a seminar at our center. Yeah, I already told you these are the forthcoming conferences. The 10th year anniversary conference, Border Mobility and Diversity. This International Migration Conference will be an interdisciplinary approach to draw on the past and current state of migration. And we are planning to obviously make a conference on the Syrian migration flux sometime during next year. Oh, here is the people at the moment. This is our latest picture. Professor Ahmet İşduygu is the founding director of the center and still directs the center. Here you see the researchers at the moment, but more than that number of researchers have been already affiliated with Mirakoç during the last decade and be a part of the Mirakoç research process. Just a little bit of shameless self-promotion. This project I'm working within right now, Euronet, is the Transnational Migration in Transition project on temporary mobility of people. It's an international research project for the period of 2014 and 2017. The objective of Euronet is to attain an understanding of the current characteristics and related policy impact of temporary transnational mobility of people. The findings in the European and Asian context will provide insights to be applied to other world regions. Projects seeks to help national and international policymakers to address the challenges arising in the increasingly interconnected and demographically mobile world. This will be done by discovering how politics structures the movement of people in sending, transit, and receiving countries, and by shedding light on the international practices and experiences of individual migrants. Case studies will be carried out in out of 11 countries: China, Finland, Germany, Greece, Hungary, India, the Netherlands, the Philippines, Thailand, Turkey, and Ukraine. I just wanted to give a brief information on the project because for the project we gather data on temporary migrants in Turkey, the immigrants, which includes not many but few Dutch migrants in Turkey. Here in these tabulations, in these tables, you see the number of work permits issued to Dutch people in 2012. And the total number is, as you see in 2012, is about 270. Not about, but 270 exactly. And when it comes to residence permit issued residence permits in 2012, we see the number as 2,859, which is increased, doubled actually since 2009. Not only related with Dutch immigrants, but when we look at the many other European immigrant cases for Turkey, we see this trend of Turkey transforming into a immigrant country also, not just only an immigrant country. That's another number. We see here a larger population of Dutch population. Actually, the Netherlands come as the 5th country after United Kingdom, Germany, Greece, and Ireland for the property owners in Turkey, mostly retirees around the coastal areas. And this is the last graphic I want to share with you. This is the number of third-year level students from the Netherlands since 2007. As you see, the number is increasing, as I already mentioned. For the last decade, the transformation of Turkey is towards the immigration trend, but still the total number is not very high. So I think that's all I want to tell for today. Thank you very much for listening.